Welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting is concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, providing it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself so that anyone who intends to record the meeting can make you aware. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, could members speak as clearly as possible, keep background noise to a minimum, ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent, especially the pinging of laptops. We have one member of the board joining us remotely today. I will now ask them to confirm that they can hear us and check we can hear them. Councillor Cornthwaite.
I can hear you, Ben. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Any members of the board with voting rights who join the meeting remotely are not able to vote on any resolutions of the board, but may otherwise participate in the debate. Also joining us remotely at this moment, we have Tina Russell. Can you confirm that you can hear and see us?
I can.
Thank you very much. We have a large number of attendees present, and so I will ask people the first time you speak, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, that would be very helpful. Okay, first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies for absence?
Apologies for absence were received from Councillor Bruce Baker.
Any other apologies?
And Councillor Harry Bramer.
Okay, thank you. Any other apologies? No. Any details of members nominated to attend the meeting in place of a member of the committee?
Yes, Councillor David Davies will be substituting for Councillor Bruce Baker today.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Councillor Davies. It's also a moment to welcome Councillor Harvey back to this committee. Look forward to your input into our discussions. Do any members have declarations of interest in respect of items on this agenda? Okay. Item 4, approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of October 2024. Are there any proposed corrections for accuracy? In that case, can members of the board who are present at the meeting please vote to approve the minutes of the meeting held on 28th of October 2024 be agreed as a correct record? Everybody? Okay. Questions from members of the public. Have we received any written questions from members of the public?
Yes, 2 questions were submitted by members of the public and were published along with responses as a supplement to the agenda on the Herefordshire Council website.
Are there any supplementary questions?
Yes, we've received 2 supplementary questions.
Okay.
One of them is from Mr. Milne, who I believe will read his question out now.
Okay.
The submitted question is full of acronyms, which I will unscramble for the benefit of members not familiar with them, so that may take me slightly above the minute. Simply excusing failure to keep minuted records of its regular meetings with Active Travel England over the considerable funding the Council has received for active travel measures, as we heard in response to the questions from Mrs. Potherow and Martin on the 6th of December, is unhelpful. I therefore ask plainly for a full account of how the various external monies for active travel, that's including the Department of Transport Access and Capability, Levelling Up Fund, Active Travel 4 Fund, Hereford City Centre Infrastructure, STF Supercycle, Hereford City Centre Transport Package, Section 106, etc. funds are proposed to be applied to the various projects. That includes Ayleston Hill, Barton Road, Great Western Way, the Cathedral Quarter, Quiet Route, Safer to School, local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, Commercial Road, Blue School Street, and the Three Elms area, etc., with an assurance that scheme development and design is transparent to ensure that they are fit for purpose and value for money before decisions are made. Now, I recognise that, given the nature of the question, a published written answer later would probably be appropriate.
Thank you very much for your question. We will ensure that a written answer is provided.
Thank you.
And there's a second question, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. I'll read that now. And this is from Ms. Reid of Hereford. Supplementary question for 16/12/2024 SMB meeting. Per LAIT, as of 31st of March 2024, the rate of children in care per 10,000 children was Herefordshire 114. Statistical neighbours average 66.78. The statistical neighbours rates are Wiltshire 46, Somerset 53, Devon 59, Cornwall 59, Suffolk 62, Gloucestershire 65, Dorset 68, Norfolk 68, Shropshire 121, England 70, West Midlands regions 90. Per LAIT, the number of children in care in Herefordshire on 31st of March 2024 was 387. Per the placement sufficiency strategy, there should be 350 at 31st of March 2024, at 31st of March 2025, and 280 at 31st of March 2026. Average annual cost for each child that returns back into care is £61,614, compared with an average annual cost of supporting a child to return home of £5,627. That's from www.leeds.gov.uk. Should extra resources, e.g. staff, be invested in reunification to reduce the costs and number of children in care? And we have received a response to that question, which I can read out. Response. We are currently meeting the demand for care prevention and rehabilitation in the services provided. We need to ensure staffing is proportionate across the whole of children's social care services within the budget allocation provided. We keep an overview on demand pressure in each part of the service areas, and we have responded to move funding and staffing to respond to change in demand, and we will continue to do this as part of our strategic and budget management.
Okay, thank you very much. Have we received any written questions from members of the council?
No questions are received.
And that brings us to item 7, which is likely to take up the bulk of this meeting, I would have thought. We have a report providing the Scrutiny Management Board with a report on the delivery and management of Herefordshire Council's capital projects. We have quite a lot of people in attendance. We have a little timetable to ensure that we cover all 4 areas, and also to enable some people to come and go. The committee members should have seen that timetable. It's an upper limit for each section, not a target to hit. I propose that we'll ask for some introductory remarks, then we'll focus on Children and Young People's Directorate, and try and read across, looking at the relationship between the revenue outturn, the capital outturn, delivery and performance, and then do the same for community wellbeing, then for E&E, and then for corporate and central services, and then we'll have a chance to consider what that means in the round. And I suggest that committee chairs will kick off, relevant committee chairs will kick off the questioning in each of those areas, and as we now have the chair and vice chair of children's services, hopefully the vice chair of children's services will have points to add to that point. The first section is an opportunity for introductory remarks. I think possibly the Director of Resources would like to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. For those who don't know, I'm Rachel Sanders, Director of Finance, Section 151 Officer. The Q2 report, which was presented to Cabinet in November, presents the results to the period ending 30th of September. It includes 6 months of actual transactions and 6 months of estimated transactions to give a forecast outturn position for the year, which is an overspend of 10.2 million. The report also identifies management recovery action currently expected to reduce that overspend by 8.2 million to £2 million for the year. The report identifies that of the £19.5 million savings target for 24-25, £8.9 million worth of savings have been delivered to date, with a further £5.6 million which are forecast as in progress or on target. This leaves £5 million of savings currently assessed as at risk, with mitigating actions identified and work underway to deliver those as a priority. Happy to answer any questions.
Do any Cabinet members want to make any introductory remarks? Councillor Mason, perhaps?
Councillor Mason, and I think maybe I would like to just note, should we have taken the apologies from Councillor Stoddart, who of course normally it fits this role and I'm simply sitting in for him as a substitute. Is it necessary to note his apologies? They weren't mentioned earlier.
We didn't invite him to the meeting, so because obviously we knew the absence, so there's no apology required.
Understood. In which case I really will introduce myself merely as Councillor Mason, substituting for Councillor Stoddart, endorsing what was previously just mentioned by Rachel, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, if members are happy, we'll dive straight into directorate by directorate, and Councillor Fagan, if you'd like to kick us off with.
Yeah.
So we'll have about 25 minutes on, up to 25 minutes on Children and Young People's Directorate.
Okay, thank you. So the question really is looking at the pressure that the send transport is posing to the budget, and really trying to understand sort of what the nature of this pressure is. So is it the cost of the transport, how many children are eligible, that's growing, so identifying exactly why those costs are rising so much, and then also looking at, do we have a plan to address that? How are we going to deal with this problem? I know that every council has it, I understand that, but actually what is our plan? We must have some sort of plan in process for dealing with these sort of cost pressures.
Yep, thank you. I'm happy to attempt to answer some of that and provide some background. So in terms of that cost pressure, it's twofold. So we've seen an increase in the number of student passengers from 465 to 511 between September 2023 and September 2024. But also we are seeing a 23% increase in costs as well. Now we are doing a significant amount of work to address that cost pressure. That includes measures such as reviewing options to lease minibuses and review of personal transport budgets, accelerating the travel training scheme to encourage students to become more independent. We are looking at policies to increase sufficiency of local transport options, and really consider how we might increase availability in what is quite a saturated market in Herefordshire. So a huge amount of work underway, recognising this as a significant cost pressure in 24-25, and one that we expect to continue in 25-26 without any real action taken.
Okay, thank you. And has the mileage scheme for parents actually been one of the considerations? I assume that most parents of children with special educational needs have sort of adapted vehicles, and I know that some councils have actually been looking at mileage schemes for those parents, which are probably considerably cheaper than actually contractors. Is that one of the options that have been considered? Absolutely. As part of our review of that cost pressure, that will be one of the actions that we will consider. Thank you. And is there an actual plan that we would be able to see, members would be able to see specifically addressing these issues? I think we're working through those options at the moment. That's being led by the transformation team. I'm sure we can certainly bring something back once there is something more formal in place. Okay, thank you very much. I also wanted to look at the underspend in there are different categories of underspend. If we had known that we didn't need that additional funding. So first of all, sort of why are there certain areas which are sort of underspending, and then potentially are we budgeting ahead to make sure that those areas are being put allocated towards a different elsewhere in the budget, and how have those underspends actually impacted the service delivery?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So in the Children and Young People Directorate, in the Q2 report, we have highlighted 3 areas of underspend, which I think you're referring to. So we have currently an underspend in the, apologies, let me just check that, in the,
Can I? So there's the agency and foster care looked after supported accommodation. I think that's one of the areas. That would be a good place to start.
yep, so that unspend relates to reduced headcount in our staffing budgets, which is obviously offset by increased costs in the agency budget. That's one of the key areas where the Directorate is seeking to make those changes to reduce those the agency cost pressures, replacing those agencies with permanent staff.
Okay, thank you very much. So has that actually had an impact on the service that the young people would be having? How has that sort of affected them?
Chair, with your permission, I might ask Tina Russell, Director of Children's Services, to comment on the impact of service delivery of those changes in the agency and staffing profile.
Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, the movement of agency reduction in agency to permanent is obviously a positive thing, which enables us to manage our budget, which is a positive thing. But we are still managing a number of staff vacancies, and that, whilst meaning we're not paying for those posts, is absolutely having an impact on service delivery. But we are managing those vacancies really carefully. We're not leaving the pressures all in one service area. There's shared management of that demand across different parts of the services so that we can support individuals. Um, and it's really important for us that we don't just take on any poor quality staff or keep poor quality staff just so that we've got people in places. There's no holding vacancies for the purposes of managing budget at all. It is simply our ability to recruit quality agency staff or permanent staff to those vacant posts. So we continue to do that and drive that recruitment as absolute key for us. Um, but you'll see in a related KPI report, we've had at the beginning of the 2 quarters of this year some pressures on our social work assessments in timescales. And that is a direct result of having, I think at the beginning of this year, sort of towards June, July time, we had some 5 members of staff that, for all different reasons actually, all left within a very close proximity over 2 to 3 weeks. And that has a big impact because you can't, if each of those staff members have got an average of 20 cases, which is about right for an assessment team, actually you're suddenly needing to deal with 80, 100 plus children's cases that need to be reallocated in order for that assessment to be completed. And in some of those cases, obviously, if it's early starting point for those assessments, then they need to be started and in elements redone. So it is having an impact on service delivery in those areas. But I think that we're doing what we can to mitigate that immediate pressure that's felt on staff. And the other part, which I think is really important, is the impact that restorative practice is making on our services. And that means that we have got less children on child protection, we have got less children going through the court proceedings, and we have very, very close scrutiny on any children that come into care, and some do need to come into care for their protection. But we have really close scrutiny of those placements to make sure that we're getting the very best value in all those placements. And that's, I think, the other key area where we've managed to manage our budget really carefully within children's. But it is a demand-led service, and good financial management means that we have to always prepare for that demand. We had a case literally just last week that went from 340,000, in fact 348,000 placement for a child up to 525,000. And that was because of a rising complexity of need for that child. And so you can imagine that that increase, whether it be for a short period of time or a medium period of time, is a significant challenge to the budget. And these are the things that we monitor and we manage all the time. So there is impact on service delivery, but I think we're doing everything that we can to mitigate and to manage that, so that the frontline staff and managers are not feeling an unreasonable ability to manage good quality services whilst we're managing the budget.
Thank you. If I can just move on to the provision of support for the 200 young people, the NEETs, not in education, employment or training, and the delay in providing that support. I mean, what is the impact of that, and what are we doing to mitigate that?
It's a mixed picture, really, for those people, for those young people. It's a mixed picture of finding sufficient opportunities. So we need to find more opportunities for those young people to have education, employment and training here in Hereford locally. We also, though, within that group have a number of children, well, all of those children, where we need to be able to give them choices. As all young people, you can imagine, they want choices. They want to work in places and service areas that they want to work in. So not only do we need to expand the range of opportunities that are available to them, but we need to make sure that they've got choices there as well. Otherwise, we're going to really struggle to get them engaged. And we have got some children, young people that have been out of education, employment and training for a long time. And so to reintroduce them has to be very supported and very specific for all of those reasons. So I think work is underway there, but there is a lot more that we need to be able to do. And it does start with creating more and more opportunities, which of course gives them more and more choices that we can provide locally in Herefordshire.
Thank you. Just to draw that out a tiny bit, are we working with our partners sufficiently well within the county and with other businesses and different groups within the county, or do we need to actually strengthen that work on our partnerships to support these children?
We are working with our partners and through the corporate parenting board as well, and through the youth hub. Work is going very well, actually. But I think we need to do a lot more strengthening of that work with local businesses within Herefordshire that may be able to help us increase, as I say, those local choices of opportunities.
So we have, Tina's covered it very well, but just I guess to cover the kind of the business engagement and college provision side of the NEET support. So we have now a skills board that's been in place for about 12 months. That includes all of the FE and HE and individual training providers. In the county, it's chaired by David Williams, who's the principal of Hereford Ludlow and North Shropshire College. And Alexa Heath, who was part of Tina's team, sits on that board. And we work closely then with the Growth Hub's engagement with employers and support through kind of workforce planning and other things to feed back into that group to kind of make the two ensure we've got the strong link between educational provision, how we engage young people, and what the employment opportunity requirements are in the county as well. And that's helped shape. So through UK Share Prosperity, fund. We've spent, I think it's about £1.5 million in this financial year supporting training within both workplaces and a range of NEAT related packages to support young people into work. Youth Hub is part of that. So it's a true kind of cross-council area of work, because obviously there's the engagement with the employers and the colleges, as well as the engagement with younger people, schools, and how and where people fall between the cracks.
Thank you. Chair, I've just got, I have a couple more questions. I'll try not to be too long. Hopefully you've got the time. But it was a question around the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So why are those costs growing? And what are we doing to deal with that? And then the other question was just around the use of around the capital programme. So there've been a lot of delays within the capital programme and on school improvements, and just some sort of explanation around that and what the impact of that is on the schools and the young people, and how we can kind of best improve those works within the capital programme that have been reprofiled. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I can take the question on the UASC unaccompanied asylum seeking children. The cost pressure relates to the difference between the cost of looking after those children and the amount received. So there's currently not sufficient funding to meet those costs, hence there's a cost pressure in year.
Sorry, just out of interest, has that changed? Because obviously if we're looking at a variance in year, presumably we had set a budget assuming an amount of money, and has that changed in year, or what has changed in year?
I think also the number of children has increased, hence the budget pressure.
It's less about the number of children increasing. It's more about those children who then move from being looked after children and become care leavers. And the budget that we get from the government then significantly changes and reduces when a child who is looked after, who is unaccompanied, becomes a care leaver. The funding reduces significantly, but actually their placement needs and costs of those placements don't. And representation is regularly made to the government and the Home Office in terms of this issue by the ADCS group nationally and regionally, actually.
Thank you. And then there was just the question about just looking at the capital programme and the works to schools that have been delayed and reprofiled. I think it would just be good to get an idea of sort of what the impact of that is for the schools and for the children within the schools, and how we're addressing that.
Who wants to take that up?
Thank you, Chair. I can provide an update on the reasons for the delay in funding. So some of the capital projects that have been reprofiled relate to maintenance work that was required to be carried out during school holidays, and hence the delay. Brookfield was delayed due to delays in funding. It's now in construction and expected to complete next year. We have two further schools, Peterchurch and Aylestone. Both are expected to commence building now in the next financial year. If I can refer to colleagues in Children's Services to outline the impact on children as a result of those delays.
They would be, as you would imagine. We don't put anything through a capital programme that doesn't need work to be done, and it's really important that we get those things done. But as Rachel's described, sometimes there are delays that are not within our control. The schools will better accommodate children. It helps them take more places for children. Some of these changes mean that they can take more children's school places, which of course, once they're completed, reduces the demand for us to place children out of county. Equally, it means that, with good quality buildings and accommodation spaces, etc., which is what this is about, it means they can manage the children's needs within those schools as well. And if those things are delayed doing that, makes that much more difficult. So it does have that impact, But as I say, I think we're trying very hard to not let those delays be things that we can't, that we can control. We do need more, and we've currently got a case, business case coming forward for some further additional capital investment for our approved schools, which is about supporting children to maintain, to be remaining in mainstream school, and that's something that will be coming forward. That reduces obviously our need then for children to be excluded from mainstream school and or placed out of county if we've got an in-house approved premises.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be helpful for the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee maybe just to have a look at that capital programme and in more detail. But I realise that there are a lot of other questions to be asked, and so I'll leave it at that unless anybody else has got any questions around children's.
Well, because we started early, we still have almost a little over 10 minutes left. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to turn to the Vice Chair of Children's and give Councillor Harvey first go if she has any questions or points. Nothing? Okay, then Councillor Stark was next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is really a question for the Cabinet. I'm a bit concerned we don't just have a dialogue between ourselves and officers, because we're here to scrutinise Cabinet action on what's happening from the Q2 performance outputs. We increased the budget in this area by over 20% this year. We didn't have a choice as a council because of the shortfall last year. So my first question, which is general, I'd like to ask the Cabinet, are you happy with progress this year on children's services and the KPIs, given that 20% uplift in the budget? And if not, and if there's areas that are concerning you, could you draw those to our attention and what actions you might be taking to mitigate them? That's my first question, Chair.
Councillor Powell, one for you for sure.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. It's important to recognise that if you like, the official arbiter is the inspector at Ofsted. So obviously, the series of monitoring visits that come with the current position that we're in are, if you like, the official findings. The most recent Ofsted recognised a number of areas of improvement. And one of those, importantly, relating back to an earlier question, one of those was about the improvement in the quality of assessments. So I think it's important to recognise that the inspectorate are the authority. But in terms of the question posed to Cabinet, in my view, significant progress has been made since the appointment of the new director. When Tina landed, one of the first things that she did, you'll be aware, is to revisit the full content of the improvement plan and the related journey. Importantly, has set out three particular aspects to that, one of which is to make sure that we robustly and consistently explore the experience of children and their families who we have engaged. Because, of course, children and families have an important voice that, in the director's view, and indeed others have explained that, hadn't been secured strongly and robustly enough. We are in the early stages of that, but in the early and emerging stages of that, significant number of those families are reporting on a series of set questions, and that appears to be giving some solid assurance that where there's been intervention, they feel that social work intervention has been appropriate, was supportive and achieved their outcomes. We also hold a series of 6 weekly or thereabouts briefings for all members. The director talks us through a key number of measures there, and we have a good sense of where we are making progress and areas that we still are concerned about. And importantly, we understand the detail of activity that sits behind those areas that we are concerned about. And just to finish on workforce, we have a new interim director. We have a a permanent senior leadership and management team now, and staff are telling us, and I would refer you to the last paragraph of the Ofsted inspection, but staff are telling us that they enjoy working in Herefordshire. They feel their case workloads are manageable, they feel well supported, and they are well led. And that is really important, because we need quality leadership of our workforce to empower and enable them to conduct the restorative work that we want to be delivered. And of course, we want our workforce to be good advocates to continue our recruitment of permanent workers. So on a range of areas there, I am confident that we are moving in the right direction, acknowledging that we still do have some challenges and we are still on that improvement journey.
Yes, and just one specific question, Councillor Powell. I mean, one of the overspends is on SEN transport. I know we've had a bus service improvement grant, and we're looking at how we spend the second allocation of that in terms of bus provision across the county. Obviously, SEN transport is a specific part of that. Have you been taking any actions to try and see what options are for the council in terms of reducing that overspend?
So as the Director of Finance reported, there's been some significant activity. It was one of the first matters that I raised not long after taking up post, and there are some discussions taking place. So when I took up office, the special educational needs budget wasn't sitting within the broader schools transport area, and so it seemed to me to be logical to at least have that, explore that discussion and see if that was right. That conversation continues between the Director of Children's Services and the Director of Economy Environment. An independent piece of work has been commissioned, so we understand the detail of that. And forgive me, I don't know the fine detail of that, but as the Director of Finance has reported earlier, there is a significant amount of work ongoing to come up with a differing range of options that will meet those needs.
I'm just going to jump in just to follow this through. I'm interested, and I genuinely don't know the answer, the degree to which some of the capital schemes that we were talking about just now might impact on things like the SEN transport. If we build more school places of the right sort in the right place, will we see a reduction or at least a slowing in the increase of SEN transport costs?
Thank you. So over the course of the last year or so, there has been investment in additional provision within mainstream schools for special educational needs. So a number of schools, and we need to acknowledge the very positive response that we've had collectively across schools in the county. It's been really, really good. But the point is, that investment has enabled an increase in school capacity in a number of schools to meet the needs of children with special educational needs. That's the first issue. Secondly, Herefordshire Council were successful in a bid to central government recently to increase or to deliver a special school. That will come forward. The department continue to talk to the Department for Education about the time scale of that. And despite a number of questions and prompts and challenges, we are still being advised by the department that that will be delivered during 2027. And as the Director reported in her input earlier, there is an emerging business case for alternative provision, and that will enable children to be maintained within mainstream school by meeting their needs in a more flexible way. So the answer to your question, very simply, Councillor, is yes, it will have an impact, of course. Not only has an impact in terms of finance, but equally as importantly, it will mean that children and their families can have their needs met in county and closer to home, which we know they would want to happen. So there is work ongoing, but the very straightforward answer to your question is yes, it will make that difference.
Okay, just to note for members that Councillor Fagan and I will be meeting early in the new year to scope out how Scrutiny can contribute to. Are there any more questions on children and young people before we move on?
Chairman, sorry.
Please. Yep.
Chairman, sorry, it wasn't a question. It was just an observation. I agree with all of the points that have been made by Councillor Powell. But I think the way I would also just add to answering the question is the fact that what has happened is that significant investment that we did, that you highlighted, was really trying to set a realistic budget when we're looking at really trying to improve an improvement there. So I think that has helped tremendously because we're on that improvement journey, and everything we do say is cautious because, you know, we don't want to say things are better than they actually are, but there's lots of positives going forward, and that's a direct result of the right investment. But one of the key things also moving forward is the full understanding of the financial picture and real financial grip that's really helped us to understand where we are, and that has been a tremendous help in moving forward on that improvement journey. So I think more investment has gone in, but there's a greater understanding of where that money is going so that we know where every penny is. So that's really, really helpful for that improvement journey. And the more improvement we make, the more we're going to retain staff and convert agency staff to hopefully be full-time staff, which drives down costs as well. So it's all interconnected, but I think that extra investment is really starting to pay dividends.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we will turn our attention to community wellbeing, and I will ask Councillor Crockett, as the relevant scrutiny chair, to kick us off.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Councillor Pauline Crockett. I'm the Healthcare and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee Chair. Well, so much to go through, isn't there, on this report and Scrutiny Management Board. So what I first looked at were the key variances from the budget at the end of Q2. And we all note that there were 3 overspends, 1 underspend and 1 net spend. But the good thing, looking at that, is at the end of the term, we are looking at no risk. So that's a really positive point of note. I'll just go back to Appendix A, page 49, where it does say about the 0.8 million underspend. So net forecast for reduced headcount of staff and agency and interims. Whilst I think that's a really good move that we're reducing those costs there, I just wondered whether some of it was due to restructuring of the directorate and whether that will have any effect on the performance of the team.
Thank you, Councillor Crockett. I'm Hilary Hall. I'm Corporate Director, Community Wellbeing. Some of the staffing changes have been as a result of restructuring. I think it's given us a structure that's fit for the purpose, fit for future purpose, and therefore I don't anticipate any issues in relation to delivering the services based on that. Some of the reduction is actually because we've managed to convert agency staff to permanent, which I think is really positive and will be positive for us going forward.
Thank you. I was hoping that was going to be the response. And again, we are mirroring what's happening in the Children's Directorate with, you know, reducing interims, reducing agency, recruiting more to our service. So that's all a good move. Looking at capital on page 45, looking at the Transformation Board, we note that Table C has got the reprofiled budget details, and there are 4 items on that capital table for us. While it's useful to have the narrative, it doesn't always explain the why these things have happened. And I just wondered whether we could either ask for further information and timeframes on those, or whether anybody would like to discuss them in the room. The first one is the empty property investment, and it says the purchase of a property was later than expected. So, you know, why was that later than expected? Was it due to complexities in the purchasing? And and it goes down through all of that table really. Stronger Towns Fund, failed procurement, Stronger Towns Library and Learning, due to change of cabinet. I don't understand that one. And then the last one, it's a full explanation of the service director under viewing a review on that capital grant scheme. So it's those three that potentially might have a little bit more explanation.
So I'll attempt some explanation, but I'm more than happy to provide a written response afterwards. So particularly on the empty property, we had some capital grant from the from the Rough Sleeper Initiative, which has enabled us to, which we need to use in this financial year. So we've moved the prudential borrowing of 300,000 into next financial year, which will enable us to use that. So it's a better utilisation of the grant by doing it that way. In terms of the Libraries Improvement Fund, that was a grant that we were given to buy tablets and other technology for libraries. We've moved some of it into next year because there's just been a delay in purchasing it. It will still go ahead and we'll spend the full amount of the grant. It's a profiling thing rather than anything else. And in terms of the two Stronger Towns, my understanding is, and Roger may be able to help me out here, that with the change of direction, particularly with the libraries and the decision to put it into Shire Hall, those changes have just been reprofiled as a result of that move. I don't think, it isn't that the money isn't going to be spent, I think it's just a reprofiling that's been done. But I appreciate that may not be helpful, and I'm more than happy to provide a written response.
Thank you. That is helpful. Thank you very much. And I don't know whether Roger Allenby would like to follow on. Just remind us who you are, please, Roger.
Oh, yes, probably should have that before, sorry. Roger, I'm the Director for Growth in the Economy Environment Directorate, but working closely with Hilary on the museum project in particular at the moment. So the museum project reprofile it just really reflects where we are in terms of the projects and some of the delays we've had in finding a contractor. We've been through a few stages of trying to get a contractor involved just to kind of finalise the end of RE before the construction design and cost. We're in the process of doing that now, but that does mean that we've spent less in this financial year than what we'd originally hoped, and it's just moved the spend back a little bit. It's still all within the time frames from the various different funders, so there's no risks around that. And as soon as we've got a contractor on board, we'll be able to finalise a profile, because at the moment it's all indicative until you've got somebody that's actually on board to do the work. And colleagues that are working on the library project will be going through exactly the same thing. So as you go through each stage in the project, you find out a few more issues around the complexity of delivery, and then they factor into the timescale, and then they'll be looking as well for planning now and then a contractor thereafter. So it doesn't reflect any major problems. It's just fairly natural with capital projects to take a little bit longer, particularly in historic buildings, as you find out what some of the issues are.
Thank you, Roger. That's really helpful, because, we want the public to understand what and why these things are happening or not happening. So I think the more we can share with the public, the better. I've just forgotten. I should have gone back to the 0.6 million net utilisation of the Social Care Resilience Reserve back in the key variances, and I just wondered what has the Social Care Resilience Reserve been used for, and is it likely to be called further call on it this year and in future years?
Thank you, Chair. The Social Care Resilience Reserve was established in 24-25 at 1.8 million, and we're forecasting to use that in full in 24-25, and that largely relates to increased demand and complexity of care. As part of budget setting for 25-26, we're obviously considering levels of demand, activity, and the costs of care, and we'll incorporate that activity data into our budget setting for 25-26.
Yeah, and I think we've already acknowledged that it is demand-led, and we're mirroring the Children's Department as well on that. one of the KPIs was percentage of service users aged 65 plus discharged from hospital into Home First who are still at home 91 days after discharge. And we actually have Q1 actual 77.1% against 80% projection, and similar for Q2. Is there something specific we're doing now to improve this? I appreciate it's not a huge amount, and but it's just a bit of a amber rag rating.
I think, as you've already said, we are very much a demand-led service. So whilst we might set a target of 80%, it really depends on the people with whom we're working at the time. So we're doing nothing, I would say, over and above what we would already be doing in terms of ensuring that those people who can be able to stay at home after they've been in hospital. But it's not an exact science of being able to say we can absolutely hit 80%. We aspire to that, and that's where the national targets are. So that's where the best performing authorities would expect to be. But as we know, particularly in Herefordshire, we have an ageing population. Actually being able for older people who are frail to be totally re-abled is very difficult. And that's not to say they can't be, but actually we are dependent on the people, literally the individuals who we're working with at any one time. So it's a useful indicator in terms of we would want to know that people who are being discharged from hospital who could be re-abled are actually managing to stay at home. But it's very difficult to set a target that would actually give you absolute certainty that we could achieve that target. We could achieve 85%. I think for me it's more important that I've got assurance from a quality perspective that those people that are being discharged to Home First are then living safe, independent lives at home. And we do that through an audit process rather than a strict adherence to a target. The target's useful and the indicator's useful, but it's not our sole measure of our performance in this area.
I think, again, it's really important for the public to understand that, because, you know, I think we perhaps set our goals too high, and then it seems that we're failing, but we're not actually. We're going with what we've got and the people we need to support, and also to make sure that they have got exactly what they need rather than being discharged and then returning to the hospital situation. So again, thank you, Hilary. One of the really positive things I thought was the Herefordshire homelessness count. We had an actual of 23-24. We had the number of 5 people, and in Q1 actual was 18 against projection of 19, and then Q2 10 against projection of 15. So I just wondered what we're going to do in this budget and future budgets to reduce the number of households becoming homeless, and what's the impact of housing supply, and have we modelled the likely increased revenue cost into the medium term?
So in terms of what we're doing, it's very much prevention. So it is about preventing, working with households much sooner to prevent them becoming homeless. It is slightly different from people who are rough sleeping, but if I concentrate on people in temporary accommodation, that's very much the direction of travel. So we have an officer based in Talk Community who's doing that really early identification of potential homelessness. So he's working, I hate the expression upstream, but he's working very much in that before even people feel that they're at risk. And then our housing solutions officers are actively working with households to try and prevent them. That could take the form of advice. It can take the form of mediation within the family, because one of the top 4 reasons for why people becoming homeless, it's around family or matrimonial breakdown. So we do mediation. We'll pay off rent arrears to avoid people becoming evicted, and we'll even signpost people so they're collecting the right housing benefits. We'll do everything we possibly can to prevent people becoming homeless. I think the impact is difficult in terms, so the demand is definitely outstripping supply at the moment. We've got around 158 households in temporary accommodation at the moment, which, as you've seen in the papers, has given us that overspend. We've factoring that into next year's budget. We have to, because we can't see that reducing anytime soon, but we are working really hard around those homelessness presentations. And as I say, I think what we're seeing with some of that early work through the officer in talk community, it is only one officer and we are looking to do more there, is actually working with people before it gets to that crisis point where we're having to do the intervention. But I think with the cost of living crisis, no fault evictions, domestic abuse and family breakdown, they're the top 4 reasons why we are dealing with the demand that we are. And it's very it's not a quick process to move that forward. So to get more supply into the system isn't an overnight thing that we can achieve. We are working hard. Members will have been at the briefing last week with one of our registered providers. They want to bring more houses on stream, but that's not a quick process either. So we are working very hard to do it, and we're trying to manage what we can. We are looking, members will be aware of the capital provision we've made. We bought one property which will give us 4 one-bedroom properties. We're looking at another property that will potentially give us 28, and that will be significant in terms of addressing that immediate demand for temporary accommodation, but I'm aware that's not permanent, and you know, we wouldn't fool ourselves that it is, but if we can at least reduce our reliance on bed and breakfast accommodation for our temporary accommodation, that would be a big step forward for us. So there's a huge amount of work going on in the area. I'm very happy to come to a relevant scrutiny and talk more about it, but it is a particular area of pressure for us.
Can I just jump in, just to follow this on? Looking across the cabinet, are we comfortable that every role in cabinet is doing what they can to try and address this challenge? Because it is about not just about prevention, it's about increasing supply, it's about a set of things that don't sit. But please respond.
Yes, so from my point of view, which is sort of ensuring we've got sufficient houses as best we can to home the people that are in temporary accommodation, I work closely with Councillor Biggs, who is looking at this more the strategic side of housing. So yes, we've purchased a number of properties over the last couple of years to house both people who are care leavers and also people who have been homeless and have gone into our supported accommodation. Those are mainly supported houses that move forward for moving forward. We also do a lot of work with, which hasn't been perhaps touched on so much with this particular directorate, but has to do with children's. We do a lot of work with things like shared lives, and we want to really push that forward going forward, so that people with relatively mild learning disabilities can live with somebody that would like to share their home with them. We're also looking at shared days as well, so as an option for housing. The properties that we've purchased are really top class and absolutely really good for the people. I think the difficulty that we have is twofold. We have a situation where we've got from the point of view, as you've heard earlier, about children in special educational needs, they stay there for a short period of time. They then become adults, and we probably then have to work with them for the next perhaps 60 years, and that is a massive issue for adult social care, and I don't think people appreciate that it doesn't end when they come out of education. It goes on until they could be in their 80s or older. I think the other thing that I've picked up on, and I'm one of them, is we are going through what was the first baby boom. So just post-war, people were having children, And so those children now are reaching the age of 80. So across the country, we are having a large number of people now that are reaching 80 or just over 80. And a lot of them choose, and I know why they do, but it causes us a problem. They choose to uproot from where they are in cities and urban towns to move to the country. And so for places like Herefordshire, that is a huge demand that we've got to deal with. And I do believe that the work that we are doing across the board, looking at younger people who we're looking at working age people with milder disabilities, about how we can get them into work, and they can contribute to the county and also their own well-being. We're looking at everything we can to sort of work with people who are, for whatever reason, have been less advantaged than others. So I think we are doing, you know, as much as we can, really. Yes, it would be wonderful if we could build, as the government wants us to build, you know, thousands of houses, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be appropriate for the people that we are dealing with at the moment. And just to make a plea, with regards to people who are living, you know, who are rough sleepers as well, which are also really, really important. The rough sleeping accommodation that we're providing this winter, which I hope will go forward eventually to be a permanent 365 days of the year. I was down there on Wednesday. It is absolutely superb. It really, really is superb. And the changes that we've made in there to accommodate women separately with some bunk beds in there, which are really, really good quality. The staff and the volunteers working down there from CCP are doing a fantastic job, and the rough sleepers that I spoke to were absolutely delighted with the accommodation they got.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, Councillor Crockett, I don't want to rush you, but if you could rush, and then we'll come to Councillor Bartlett next.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gandhi. Just for the viewers or viewer, you are the cabinet member for this directorate, so I just wanted to make it, adults and wellbeing. Yes. And I also applaud you for going down to the shelter last week and the rough sleepers. I think there were 4 there last week, so I'm sure they enjoyed seeing you. You know, it's nice to.
I will not go into detail.
No, but at least you saw people and you spoke to them, and they're happy with what we're doing. So that's another good a good report. Just going again with you, Councillor Gandhi, the shared lives, it's also an important service in the Adults Directorate, and we are bringing that to Scrutiny, the healthcare and wellbeing scrutiny in the future, because I don't think people understand it as they should, and I don't think it's given as much airing as it should, because it's a really important thing. You mentioned it for children, but adults. I meant adults. Yeah. And I think one of the other things that was mentioned, the relationship with social care, social housing, and we at Herefordshire pride ourselves, I think, with our relationship with these registered providers, and we welcomed the new CEO for Connexus last week, and it shows that, you know, relationships really help. Just my last thing, please, Chair. How can we ensure that the temporary accommodation does not become permanent accommodation? Are we able to expand on that? I don't know whether Hilary or we haven't got anybody from housing here.
I will do my best, Councillor Crockett. So anyone in a temporary accommodation is issued with a licence, and particularly where we're bringing new temporary accommodation on stream, rather than a short hold tenancy agreement, so they don't acquire the rights. I know that sounds quite harsh, but it is a way of ensuring it doesn't become permanent. Each household has a personal housing plan, and an officer in Housing Solution is working actively with each household to move them into permanent accommodation. I think in terms of any temporary accommodation that we do buy, if in the fullness of time we don't require it as temporary accommodation, it would be great to turn it into permanent accommodation, but we're certainly not at that point yet. But I can assure you that we won't. We are managing it as temporary accommodation, and we will continue to do that.
And just finally, can I just make sure that we have enough officers in that department, because obviously it's a growing concern, and we don't need to overstretch the officers. We need to support them and keep them in Herefordshire.
We have sufficient staff on the establishment. We struggle to recruit, so we have some agency staff at the moment, but we have sufficient staff on the establishment in order to meet the demand. It's obviously we keep it under review, and if we need to increase the establishment, obviously we would look to do that. But as we currently stand, we have sufficient there.
Thank you very much. We're coming towards the end of this session. Councillor Bartlett will come in first. If anybody else wants to contribute, make yourself known now. Thank Councillor Stark. So Councillor Bartlett, then Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. And to be honest, one of my questions was around that managing the temporary accommodation, that it doesn't become permanent. So the fact that they've got licenses then rather than a short-term tenancy is an interesting way of going at it, but it still doesn't explain what happens to them when they reach the end of their license. And so do they just end up back on the books again or in the homeless situation? The other question as well I wanted to ask was about the help with keeping people in the accommodation that they're in at the moment. And I think that is a really useful way of looking at it, because it's probably cheaper to pay their rent than it is to find them bed and breakfast accommodation. I think that's a whole field that we could probably do with some more information about, because it is a changing landscape, and we do know that this is a major pressure on us. And as we've acknowledged, it's not just us. So, Chair, I think when we come to formulate our recommendations, that we might want to look a little bit more deeply about these initiatives and how they are helping our residents. So that was my main question and point of interest. The second question I wanted to ask, thinking about we're coming out of this year's budget now, we're looking ahead to next year's budget, and we know that our care costs are rising. We know that we're struggling to meet them. Some of our overspends are on looking, paying people, paying the need to have people working in care. And obviously we've got the changes in national insurance that will be coming online for the next budget. And Chair, I think there's, going forward, this department directorate's going to have even bigger pressures in that area. And so I think that's something else that we need to bear in mind. Obviously, we're looking at these papers now, but we're going to be looking forward in the next few meetings. So I think we need to carry forward when we go into the next meeting, an understanding that we've got even more pressures now. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stark,
yes.
And this will be the last point on this section.
Yes, I'll be quick. If you're looking at the revenue pressures at Q2, going back to what we're looking at today, one of the main areas where there are pressures is in this directorate, 3.4 million. This is a question for Cabinet. My concern is, with this pressure at this level in Q2, is Cabinet confident we're not going to get a repeat of last year with children's services and ending up with a massive overspend in this area? Because as a council, I'm concerned that we don't repeat what happened last year, where we ended up with an overspend in children's of nearly 14 million, and where we as a council didn't have really very much room for flexibility. So I wouldn't like that to repeat itself in adults. So I would like a comment from Cabinet about this and about what they might be doing in terms of trying to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. Yes, I mean, this is a forecast. We've got a demand-led service, and we've already talked about the pressures that we have and the increased pressures that we are having. And moving forward, as Councillor Bartlett says, there will be increased pressures on the revenue position due to the changes in national insurance. But this is a forecast overspend, and we're managing our way through that at this stage. We're taking the right management action as we go. So I want to avoid exactly what happened last year, because we had to pay off the overdraft effectively. And we don't want that situation again. But as I said, we're in a very good position in terms of knowing what our exact financial position is, and there is management action being taken, which, you know, if you want more detail, Rachel can take you through, but I'm confident that we're fully sighted on this gap and how it needs to be managed so that we can balance that budget by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you very much. We will draw that section to the close and turn our attention to economy and environment. And I think we have two chairs relevant here. We'll give, as he's the vice chair, we'll go with Councillor Stark first.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as you know, I've always been concerned about the allocation given to economy and environment, because I've always felt it was a poor cousin after the two statutory services. I'm pleased that there are no obvious pressures at this stage in Q2, which is a relief given that this is the main area of service delivery for most of our residents. But I do have a few questions about some of the capital delays that are going on, if I can just get to the page, and then I will go through them. And this is from an environmental point of view, because I want to leave space for Councillor Driscoll to cover connected communities. If I can just start with the solar photovoltaic panels that were planned for delivery this year, they're now not planned until next year, and there are no sites actually identified. As you know, from an environmental perspective, that is very disappointing, because one of the things we are trying to do in this council is get to net zero by 2030, both within the council and across the county as a whole. Is there anyone from Cabinet who could comment on that and maybe give us some reassurance that will actually happen next year? That's my first question.
Scott's on the screen. Scott, do you know where the photovoltaic project is in terms of the infrastructure?
I don't. I'm afraid I could come back with a written response. The only one that I have been directly involved with just recently has been the development of the Plough Lane car park solar panels, and that's moving ahead. So we're getting to a point where they're going to be able to go out to tender for that very shortly.
Councillor Swinglehurst wants to.
Yeah, thank you. So Councillor Swinglehurst, Cabinet Member for the Environment. Yeah, so just to follow on from what Scott was saying, we have got it's evolving, but it's a definite thing to do solar PV on the car park at Plough. Also looking into an additional school roof provision. Not quite certain where that is, so I won't name the school, but we are looking at that. So there are things in the pipeline. So this is probably kind of a timing issue as to when this has come into scrutiny. But I'm very happy to keep Councillor Stark informed, as and when these things start to get a bit more definite, if that's acceptable.
Yes, that would be, because obviously it's an area of concern for Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee,
yeah, quite right,
which
yeah.
I chair, Councillor Crockett, and I should have said I chair. Okay. My second area, and it is around the capital. We've suffered a lot of flooding this year across the county. Very bad flooding, both mainly actually flash flooding rather than river flooding, but river flooding has had an impact. I do applaud the work that the council does in natural flood management, because I think prevention is better than actually trying to recover from these particular horrendous events. I notice again in the programme that the natural flood management amount of that's been allocated, 104,000, which was planned for this year, is now being split over the next 2 years. That seems to me a shame, given that this is one of the areas that we should be concentrating on. And although, and this is a concern I have generally, although on the whole economy environment seems to be in a good position in terms of revenue and everything else, I really wonder whether there are certain areas where, while it's in a good position, we're not actually spending enough money on those areas, that we're not giving them enough priority, we're not actually responding to the emergencies that we are facing over the year. And natural flood management seems to me one of these areas. So there's two issues here. One is the delay in the 104,000 and what that means. And also, are we actually spending enough money in this area given the horrendous year we've had? And I just want an observation from the Cabinet about that. It is part of the Q2 performance output, and it's just really trying to get an idea what's happening going forward.
Who wants to take that? The leader has his hand up. Is that...
Sorry, I keep having a war with this microphone. Sorry. Right, yeah, absolutely. So I'll ask Councillor Mason to give more detail, but the point is this. I think that we need to spend more of our resource and more of our energies to address flooding, both with smaller projects that we can really do things to help in the very short term and in responding to an emergency, but we must be putting our resources into a more strategic approach to identify the problems that we have and get those longer term solutions to be up on and making sure that we're fully sighted on all of the problems that have been with us historically for quite some time. You know, there are certain areas where it's been a problem for a very long time. Then the flooding ceases and then we all go back to normality and then we carry on with all of our responsibilities. But we really have to have a much more strategic approach and that's what we really want to be using this next budget to address some of those longer term issues that we must be fixing. So Councillor Mason, did you want to add anything to that?
Really just building on it. We know that what's happening with the natural flood management schemes although they are generally welcomed, is they're taking a while to make sure that we've got the applications through, because there's quite a lot of pressure that we need to, well, not pressure is the wrong word, we need to work with the landowners and so on to make sure that it's something that they want to move on, and therefore it's not something we have complete control over the spend on. We're waiting for those permissions to come through. That's taking a while. There's no risk of the grant actually being lost. And building on what the leader said, our response to flood management is considerably greater than looking at natural flood management. We recognise that we are not the masters of the speed of delivery of natural flood management solutions. And so, as an administration, we will be spending a lot more money on making sure that we have flood management resilience, but just not necessarily in the natural flood management space, which is where we don't have so much control. Does that make sense?
But given we're halfway through the year, and this is a chance to make any adjustments, obviously, in terms of what we might do for the rest of this year, it's disappointing that even when you look at the 104,000 plan for this year, that's actually not going to be spent this year, Councillor Mason. And that is very disappointing. And I don't know whether there's a recommendation there, but it does seem to me that flooding itself needs to be given far more priority within this council, because, and I'm sure Ross is not alone here, but some of the events we've had this year have been off the scale. And I just feel we should be responding to that, and that's one of the concerns I've got.
Just to say, Councillor Mason cannot see Councillor Swinglehurst's hand. Which of you would prefer?
I defer.
No, just if I may just add a little bit to what Councillor Mason was saying, that we have a tendency in the council to just think that it's up to us to do everything. Natural flood management actually sits with a number of other organisations and partnerships. So if you've got projects like the Wide Adapt to Climate Change, which is coming through the wildlife trusts, and also the landscape recovery schemes that are coming forward, and stuff from the
natural landscapes national landscapes. You've also got, very interestingly, I think, because the thing with natural flood management, it's really important that you put the right measure in the right place. So you have, in order to do that, you have to understand hydrologically what's going on. It's enormously complex. And so the EA and the Internal Drainage Board, the Local Internal Drainage Board, are doing hydrological mapping of the entire catchment. That will enable us to spend our money incredibly well, because you'll be able to really pinpoint where these measures need to sit. And it's not just us, but also the Wildlife Trust, the Wine Usk Foundation, and all the other partnerships that are working in this area. So whether or not we're getting across the line with a particular bit of budget, it doesn't mean that there isn't an enormous amount of activity in this space, because you're absolutely right that climate change is something that we need to adapt to in a very real way, looking at the way in which water flows through the catchment.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I would like to think about a recommendation along those lines. Oh, Chair.
If I may, just to add a bit more to this, I mean, I think you're all aware of the level of resource that we have organisationally with regards flood management, and the fact that predominantly that is a responsive outfit to deal with flood events when they happen. We are building a programme of work, which will come to this group no doubt, to look at how we can be ahead of the programme on this, ahead of issues, because rather than just being purely responsive, which tends to have been our position because of the amount of work involved, so there is a lot of work going on. There's a team being put together to make sure that we are in control of our response, whereas what we've seen, and this comes back to my point about natural flood management, we're not in control of the speed. We need to move faster, and therefore we are putting more resources than were previously in place in order to be able to address that.
Just one last observation. I think Councillor Fane comes in, then I'll come back with other questions. We are the local flood authority, and I just wonder, Leader, whether through the Marches Forward partnership we could be doing more in terms of encouraging Powys and others to actually do some work with us on flooding mitigation and prevention. Because when you look at river flooding, it's a whole river system we should be looking at, and not just Herefordshire.
Yes, I would agree that it's a good forum in which to raise that issue, simply because rivers and watercourses do not respect boundaries and borders, I should say. But the other thing to note, and it's that Councillor Swingle has touched on it as well, is the fact that there are other bodies, organisations that are equally responsible for dealing with water management, and the situation in Ross was unprecedented in the sense that we had a massive failing of the drainage system, the sewage system, so that was a real complex problem. But I like to think that it was a good example of where the council had to repair roads. It did it as soon as it could, with the understanding and forbearance of Ross residents. But these are the real big challenges that we have to face, and what we have to get better at, I think, is strategically work with all of those bodies and our partners and stakeholders to make sure that we're all doing as much as we can in concert with one another, and to make sure that we are meeting with those relevant organisations to make sure that these issues just don't go away, because they will recur. You can be absolutely certain of that.
Just to say, the Statutory Scrutiny Officer has pointed out to me that there's obviously a lot of shared priority around flooding from Scrutiny and the Cabinet, but we don't actually have much on flooding in our work programme, so that might be a thing for us to consider as...
I want Councillor Fane.
Okay, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking at the capital projects and the allocation of grants, it looks to me like there are some issues with the with grant funding, and I wonder if we have lost capacity in the council to actually properly allocate grants at the right pace to enable this work to go ahead. So it's just a question around. There's the natural flood management scheme. There's the public rights of way grants. The grants for the Lensman schemes. Are there other grants? Are we managing to get the grants out as fast as we should be, or is there an issue? And I just wonder if that is linked to the early redundancy scheme where we actually lost a lot of experienced staff from the delegated grants team. So I wonder if there's a correlation between those.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So the delegated grant team did suffer from a loss of staff through the MERS scheme, the Mutual Early Resignation Scheme, during this financial year. However, as part of transformation of services where we have seen those reductions in staff within a particular team, what we've done is we've reviewed the work that is carried out by those teams, and we've used that as an opportunity to change the way that we are delivering services. So that team is now under more focused management. We have redefined the roles within the remaining team members. We are looking at some software to purchase to reduce some of the admin that's required in administering some of those grant schemes, and we are working to improve the speed at which we provide that support. So you're right that it was an impact on that team, but we've responded and we're trying to transform the way that we deliver those. In terms of those particular schemes, there are also, as Councillor Mason said, some areas outside of our control that mean that we can't deliver those as speedily as we would like.
Okay. Then I think it's Councillor O'Driscoll's turn to chip in, and then we'll open it to anybody who has points in this area.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with revenue, if that's all right, and then maybe move on to capital. I want to start by saying, great, well done as far as E&E is concerned. I think it was, 3.1 million of savings approved, and 87% so far has been either delivered or is on target. We're showing, I think, currently a forecast overspend of 1.3 million before management action. I'd just like to perhaps expand on what specific factors contribute to this forecast overspend. Are there any unforeseen cost pressures, or is it perhaps some underperformance in revenue generation?
Please.
Happy to take that. So in economy and environment, the significant driver for that overspend in year relates to the under-delivery of planning income. And that's been something that the service has seen now over a number of years. What we've done in recent months is asked our internal auditors to undertake a detailed review alongside the transformation team to understand some of the detail and analyse the reason for that under-delivery of income. And that is linked to an underachievement of activity, so less planning applications coming through. They've also carried out an exercise to benchmark us against other comparator authorities to understand whether we are an outlier in terms of that activity and our charging. And that confirms that we are largely aligned to other authorities, which does suggest that that income budget might need to be revisited in future years. We've also considered a further review of staffing capacity in September to look at the number of applications and the turnaround time, and just to understand whether we've got the relevant capacity in that area. So those are actions that the service are taking to understand that, and of course, as you would expect, as part of the 25-26 budget setting process, recognising now that this is not a one-off. Historically, this service has struggled to meet that income target. We will be considering that as part of revenue budget setting.
Thank you. You preempted my question, which was that's that going to be taken into consideration in the 25-26 budget, which is great. So it's that's great. At the moment, I was about to say, what actions are being taken to ensure that the savings are delivered? I mean, I know it's only small. I think it's just under £500,000, isn't it? But there are some savings at risk. How are they going to be effectively offset, please? I think there's still about just under £500,000, is it? Is there a plan in place for that as far as revenue is concerned? Thanks, Roger.
Please.
Yes, so I'm part of the Directorate Management team that reviews where we are with those budgets. So we meet with Rachel and with Paul every quarter to kind of review where we are on the savings plans. There are active saving plans for each lines of the savings. That's why we've achieved so many so far. There's a plan in place where we review where we are, and we're continuing to manage those ones that we've got to meet over the remainder of the year. Some of them are just timing. So Where we're slightly behind at the moment, for example, is around income on some of the services that we provide in terms of, and that's if it's the crematorium or the cemetery or licensing, they're reactive to when people buy and take up and pay for a service. So where we've increased fees and some of that income is meeting the gap. Obviously, we need to make sure that we are promoting those and trying to manage those over the course of the year. So it's each line is slightly different. There is a plan. Some of it's just timing, but it is managed in a controlled way, working closely with Rachel and her team.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to capital. I mean, the overall capital programme just has been revised down significantly due to reprofiling. I think it was 82.8 million has been moved into future years. And we have, just observing this, there's a £7.6 million underspend forecast in the overall capital programme, including some projects delivering below budget. I'd like to know what the direct impact of this reprofiling will be on the E&E's share of that 82.8 million, and on the timing and delivery of strategic objectives. Perhaps specifically how that might in fact impact on things like employment land and incubation space for market towns.
So I guess each project probably has slightly different reasons for delays. We're taking the employment land line. So there's the £12 million that was allocated in the capital budget change this time last December. Now, the 8 million of that is tasked for Ross Enterprise Park, which we've talked about recently at the Collective Community Scrutiny Board, and we're on track still to spend that money. We're just going through the processes now of final design, and we'll be going out for a contractor in the new year. That will, once you've got a contract, to have very firm timeframes within that contract for delivery, and that project then will be delivered within the following 12 months. So starting in the summer, finishing in the summer the year after. So the project's funded by the council. This delay in the profiling doesn't impact. We're not losing grant funding or any of those kind of things. All the schemes are on track to be delivered. It's just a matter of timing and working through the process to get them to a stage that we can get a contractor in.
Thank you. If I can come back on that, I was just a little bit confused, but looking at it, it said, I mean, originally there was just under 9.5 million planned for this year within the employment land and incubation space for market towns line. Now that's I think that's fallen to just over £1 million for 25-26. I think is it just 53,000 in 26-27, and then there's 8.3 million's been moved into 27-28, which has been bumped into the next council. What's changed? Why has this been? It feels like it's been kicked into the long grass a little bit, and I'm just concerned.
So there's, and that'll come down to the, and we can give you a written breakdown at exactly the amount. So the amount of money that's in that line, there's money which is the capital receipts money that was put in last December, which is the one where it's mainly Ross Enterprise Park, and we've been looking at other sites, including one in Bromyard. The remainder of that money is based on borrowing, which has been in the capital programme now for about 3 or 4 years, where a scheme that comes forward has got to be able to repay the amount of the activity that goes back into it, and that's the one that we've really struggled to kind of get going, get off the ground. There's been a kind of a 10-year market failure for the market to bring forward employment land because it doesn't repay fully the amount of investment that you need in order to get the employment land off the ground. And that's where that balance of money will be. There's about £6 million worth of borrowing money, which still sits as a line in the capital programme. We still look for projects that could use the borrowing to deliver it. But the £12 million is or should be profiled over spending now, a little bit this year, mainly into next year, and then a little bit into the start of the following year.
Thank you. So you're not concerned about the timescales on delivering the employment land? That continues apace.
And I guess just to kind of give you an example, so the first phase of Ross Enterprise Park, we've put in as capital receipts because all the main infrastructure, utilities, access and everything needs to be put in, but it might well be the second phase could be funded through the money that's for borrowing, but we've got to do the first phase first in order to create the market opportunity for the second. So it's just managing the profile of when those funds are available and how.
That's useful. Thank you for that. And I'd just like to touch briefly on Section 106 and what's been happening there. I think we've all been delighted with the speed that Section 106 projects have been getting off the ground, and bringing in the external help has really given it a boost over the last year or so. I just a little bit concerned now that the 3 million plan for this year is now split over 25-26 and 26-27. Why is this happening? I also understand perhaps a couple of people are leaving imminently who've got a lot of projects on currently. Can you give me some reassurance that we're going to keep the same level of intensity with delivering the Section 106 projects, and that we're not going to lose the momentum that we've built up so well over the last 12 months or so?
That one as well, if that's okay. So the Section 106 money that we've currently got, most of the reprofiling is on the bigger highways schemes, which are in a really good place to deliver, but now going to be mainly next year. So Greg Speller, who's been working all of those schemes and working with the parish councils, has been working to get them to a point where they're all now designed, all ready to go out or going out to tender, and therefore they're in a much more assured and certain place for delivery going forward than where they were. It's just a slight delay from delivery then in this year into next year, but there's a strong programme. They are all worked up. Going back to where we were with 106, the process in the past had tended to be the money comes in with planning, but it gets allocated to the service area that relates to the activity that it's for. So if it's for schools or education, it was sitting in children's. If it was for highways, it was sitting with E&E. If it was community activity, it was sat with community wellbeing, and it was sat on top of somebody's day job, often without the kind of necessarily the right skill set to bring those projects forward. So we brought in some extra capacity that's worked really well. Andrew and Greg in particular have worked on those projects to get them all to a point where they have been delivering or are now ready to deliver. That was always intended as a short-term additional extra capacity, so in interim support, which is quite a high-cost day rate to kind of centralise how we delivered those projects. That was actually supposed to end about a year ago, but was extended to carry on the momentum and to make sure that we were in a good place to deliver. What we now need to do is make sure we've got a sustainable long-term way of doing the same thing. So rather than fragmenting the delivery of the service back out across all parts of the council, to look at can we put a core team in place, long-term team in place that can deliver that in a sustainable way. So rather than relying on day rates, which is very expensive, can we establish a kind of a core resource in order to carry on doing exactly the same thing and that work, but something that we can in an more affordable way. So
I hear that. My concern is perhaps we should have that plan in place before these key individuals leave post.
And that's the plan. So they've currently got contracts with us until March next year. We're working with them, meeting them actually tomorrow to work through what work's outstanding, what capacity do we need to kind of go forward, create a plan for what the transition would be, and then we'll look at if we need to kind of extend the time frame for them in between how we manage that. But
just knowing how difficult it is to recruit and bring people in, maybe there is a recommendation here to Cabinet that we make sure that there's some flexibility that as much as possible. I'm aware people need it so that we between now and March isn't a long time to work up who you're going to need to bring it in. We could lose 6 months easily there. I think if we're not careful. So I think maintaining that momentum is key. It'd be such a shame to waste all the good work that's been done.
And there's no intention to get to that point, but we had to reach a stage where we couldn't continue to sustain the day rate, which puts quite a high pressure on some of our other budgets, and we're just working through how we manage that transition. So all we've done so far is say there will not be another 12-month extension on the contracts of day rates. We've got to come up with another solution, but we have said to the individuals, we want to carry on working with you through that transition, get your understanding as to how it might work. See if they're interested in working with us permanently rather than day rates even. So we're working through that process now. It's not going to switch everything off in a couple of months.
I think making them an offer they can't refuse is probably advisable. I think. I've got one more question, if that's all right.
Okay, we are over where we intended to be.
I'll be very quick. Winter resilience, just under 500,000, planned for 25-26, has been brought into this year. Can I ask why?
Afraid I can't answer that one. Scott, do you know at all? Scott's our delivery director.
That is about the delivery of new gritters, which have been delivered, and then there's another set of gritters to be done the following years as part of that program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are over where we wanted to be. Councillor Fagan did have a hand up. Councillor Bartlett, any more takers on E&E? But it'll be Councillor Fagan and Councillor Bartlett, and that will be it.
Mine was just quickly because I think that in terms of the section 106, we should have some sort of recommendation about a risk assessment being undertaken, because it is one of the areas where we have heard in our previous meeting that the council actually really lacks that kind of technical expertise that has managed to deliver the 106 improvements for residents. Is one of the areas that we've actually done really well at, that residents can see where they've actually had the impact of new housing foisted in their view upon them, that actually that infrastructure rollout is actually really happening. So I think that for me there's a real risk here, and I just want to make sure that we have actually done a risk assessment on the changes.
Thank you. And Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to follow up on Councillor Fagan's comments about the grant-funded capital projects. And so particularly I'm looking at the Green Homes grant and the Home Upgrade grant as my example. They're talking about projects being delivered under budget, and I'm wondering whether that's actually the same as not being, money not being spent. Particularly when I look at the Home Upgrade grant, according to our website, we're looking at halfway through papers here, quarter two papers here. Yet the website's telling me that the Home Upgrade grant is now closed to new applications. Yet the page I've got in front of me for the capital line for it is with somewhere like 1.1 million underspent. So does that underspend mean that money is actually going to have to be given back? So that's my example. My wider question, Chair, is how much of our grant money that we have been putting down is unspent and is at risk of having to go back to the funders? Because if we are getting money and we're not spending it for the benefit of our residents because we're allocating our staff resources to other projects, why are we chasing grant money?
Who would like to pick up that?
I think Councillor Inglis would like to follow us as well. So and I will double check this, but my understanding on the current HUG scheme, so the home improvement grant, when it first started, it had a very slow take-up, but the take-up over the last kind of 12 to 18 months has been much higher. And the difference in the numbers and the reason why it's not available on the website currently is we've got to commit the money to applications now in order for it to spend by the end of the financial year. So we can't carry on accepting applications now because the scheme closes in March, but the money is committed to projects now that will spend by the end of March. So that's what my understanding is, the difference between those two things, but I'll confirm to you the numbers. In terms of capacity, and obviously having grant funding comes through in different ways. So sometimes you just get an allocation. So this week we've just been told we've got £2 million of UK Shared Prosperity Fund to spend the next financial year. We haven't bidded for it, but we want it, and it's very welcome money for the county. And then within that, you get allocated an amount of money that you can spend on the administration. So for UK Shared Prosperity Funding, it's only 4%. So you get 4% of the national funding you can spend towards supporting the administration of the programme. So some of the challenges are outside of our control in terms of scale of resource, requirements and time frame for delivery and how. But obviously what we want to try to always do is secure as much money as we can do for the benefit of local people and deliver that as well as we can. It's rare in my experience of being here now for nearly 6 years that we give lots of money back through those schemes to government, but how they're delivered, and they are delivered usually across the whole of the council in various different teams in different ways, depends on the nature of the grant, how we've been given it, and what the amount of money we can utilise in order to deliver it. you want to come in as well?
I would just observe, I think this question about grants has come up a few times in our SMB meetings, so it might be something that we want to put some more effort into. So we maybe discuss that when we come to work programming. Bless you. I'm going to draw a session looking at E&E to a close there, apart from Councillor Fagan, who has asked nicely.
Thank you, Chair. It's just I just wanted to ask about the government's green books requirements, because I can see that a couple of projects, the phase 2 of the Western Bypass flagged red, the HWTA work with the Hereford Worcester Group training. I don't know what the A stands for. Sorry, but I see that they're flagged red in terms of projects because of this performance report issues with the government green book requirements on business cases, and I'm wondering whether we're struggling to provide evidence that public funds are used efficiently and effectively by providing evidence-based business cases. Is that why we're having to go back to look at this green books issue?
I think it's not so much an issue with having the evidence available. It's just it's often having the resource in order to develop them. So the Green Book business case is essentially government's full application, if you like, to the very detailed business case that goes in to say this is the case for investment with us. It's very rare that government then funds any of that pre-development work. So if you want to bid, say, for when the Levelling Up Fund bids came around last time, you can only bid for schemes that you've got fully worked up Green Book business cases for, and that's all large-scale revenue investment that's required before you can even know that you're going to get a grant fund or put a spade in the ground. We're working up Green Book level business cases now for those different projects to help us understand how we can take them forward and how we might be able to deliver them and fund them. And that's a kind of an investment in technical skills, people, and drawing together lots of different kind of information in order to be able to do that. And each scheme varies. So the Herefordshire Worcester Group Training Association one, for example, is looking at how they might be able to locate a new facility on the Hereford Enterprise Zone. We're working through that case with them. Currently, we had to change the direction of that business case because of things around subsidy control compared to what it was looked at the start. So it gets into quite complex sets of stuff. It's not necessarily a lack of evidence or will to do them. It can either be funding, it can be to do with technicalities of the project itself. It varies, really.
Perhaps we can look at that when we're looking at the grants issue potentially. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now turn our attention to corporate and central. I know that Councillor Bartlett has a point here. If anyone already knows they have questions in this area, Councillor Stark, I might have a question or two, but we'll start with Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I remember thinking back to the January budget papers that we had beginning of the year, and certainly this is one of the big times that we really started hearing about Thrive, the Thrive programme. Thrive's going to do this, Thrive's going to do that. It's going to improve our systems, processes and technology solutions to improve our customer offer. It's going to maximise our opportunities to work with partners and communities. And so it's across all of the directorates. So it it can impact on our residents right the way across. And so when I'm looking at page 55 at the RAG rating, which is where the three main central budget targets are, we've got a red RAG rating for transformation Thrive programme savings of 2.541 million at risk of the 2.6 million. We've only delivered a recurrent £59,000 saving, which is really kind of scary, because this was going to do so much work for us and it clearly hasn't halfway through the year, and we just seem to be drifting. So what I'm not understanding is, other than seeing some stuff in another table about IT transformation, which seems to have worked, what is it that these Thrive programme savings were doing that they haven't done? How are you going to turn that round within 6 months? What is that impact across all of the directorate pots that Thrive has had its fingers in? And how much have we spent to save £59,000, please?
Yes. I just note that our Director of Transformation is online and might want to chip in a moment, but please take it away.
I'm just going to take this response. I'm just going to let you all know that the Director of Transformation Strategy is online, but she has lost her voice. So I will be supporting any responses today. So in the 24-25 budget, we had a really ambitious total saving target of 19.5 million, of which, you're absolutely right, 2.6 million of those were identified as savings target S2 under Transformation Thrive programme savings. I think it's really important to recognise that we knew that those would be the most challenging savings to deliver. If you look at budget papers and financial monitoring papers for councils across the land, those savings derived from transformation are invariably the most difficult to deliver in year. At the start of the financial year, we had some detailed delivery plans in place in respect of those savings, and each year they are subject to review by external audit to ensure that we have a credible, robust and deliverable plan in place. In our audit this year, as part of the value for money work, the external auditors tested a sample of nearly 80% of those savings plans to confirm that they were in place and they were adequate. Those savings were expected to be delivered through transformation and review of income generation opportunities, service cost recovery, review of third-party spend, and transformation through customer acceleration and robotic automation projects. So those projects and those initiatives remain underway, but delivery has been slower than we expected. As the Chair rightly pointed out, we have a new Director of Transformation and Strategy in post, and what that brings is increased strategic capacity to deliver and increase the pace of delivery of those projects, but they are challenging targets to deliver. The forecast at Q2 is that those savings remain at risk, but we are prioritising that review and identifying mitigations where possible, considering that there may also be some timing issues in those, but we have not given up on delivery of those savings. We're committed to them, we're committed to transforming and delivering and building on those Thrive programmes.
Can I just follow up on this, so that if I understand what you're saying, these transformation we expect these transformation savings may still deliver savings, but in future years. What struck me is that the delivery plan for this area says everything's been delivered. So what, which seems at odds with what you've just said, which is that this is hard and we've got to do lots of things, and now we've got a Director of Transformation. So what is missing from the delivery plan that needs to be done in order to get these savings delivered?
So in terms of the in the Director of Transformation has just sent me some information on that she'd like me to share. So that delivery plan is around setting foundations for that transformational activity, so that now those foundations are in place, that can ensure that activity continues at pace in the future. But you're absolutely right that some of this is around timing of delivery, and having those plans in place might mean that we have to mitigate and identify alternative savings in 24-25, recognising that speed of delivery will increase in 25-26, and we will deliver those savings then as well.
I want to come back, but Councillor Bartlett, it's really Councillor Bartlett's question, so please.
No, thank you, Chair. There's a big one, that, isn't it? Oh, it may, going to deliver in the future. But clearly we're looking at a hole that we're going to, in two quarters' time, we're going to have a hole. So that's, I think that we are going to need a greater understanding of Thrive and the way it fits across the directorate. So that's the start of a recommendation there. I'm not sure what you were following up on, because my next question was going to be about that gaping hole in the central directorate. So we've got, was it 4.6 million there? And we've got overspend on savings plans. And I'm just wondering, is there, when we talk about Thrive and that part of the corporate central directorate, I'm struggle with these papers to work out where central and corporate sits in the way that the headings change sometimes. So I have a confusion that I'm still not sure what the question is, but to me there seems to be other holes around this area where we've got corporate and savings too.
Okay, we'll ask the Director of Resources for some clarification on that. The question I was going to ask, which I am now going to ask, is what have we learned? We set ambitious savings targets, which we have not managed to deliver in year. How are we going to make sure we don't do that next year? And if we set savings targets, that we actually deliver them. But if you could first of all explain corporate and central, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So we do try to explain the difference between corporate and central in the Appendix A in the revenue budget. But essentially corporate services represents governance and legal, HR and organisational development, strategic assets and strategic finance, as well as the performance teams, communications teams. So all of those enabling services across the council, which make up the corporate services directorate, which support all of the other three directorates across the council. In contrast, then, the central budget represents things like our treasury management budgets, our interest payable budgets, our minimum revenue provision budgets, those type of non-directorate spend areas. But I'm happy to provide some more analysis and enhance the way that we present that for clarity in the future monitoring reports.
Yes, please, thank you, because certainly they are all things that affect all the directorates. They affect the whole of the council, aren't they? So, yeah, that's where I think the clarity is missing.
Okay, thank you. And yes, if someone I don't know who would like to pick up, how can we make sure we learn from this experience, and if we set savings targets for next year, that we actually deliver them?
If I pick up on that, so as part of the budget setting process, which starts in around June, July of every financial year, once we've identified what that high-level gap might be, we start to understand how we might mitigate that gap. Some of that is around transforming the way that we deliver services. We have a really effective challenge through monthly budget boards around considering whether we can reduce expenditure, defer expenditure, stop expenditure. But ultimately, when we have a gap that we can't resolve through those means, we have a discussion about savings proposals within each directorate. And there's considerable challenge around the activity that is identified to deliver those savings. And that's internal challenge through the directorate budget boards, that's by CLT, that's through this forum at Scrutiny Management Group, at Cabinet, and then finally by our external auditors. And at the point that we set those savings targets for the next financial year, there's a detailed delivery plan in place. That's well in advance of that financial year. So those are our intentions. And in order to set a robust and reasonable and legal budget, we have that activity plan in place to support that. Inevitably then throughout the financial year, as we monitor delivery of the savings and the activity that we have identified to deliver those savings, circumstances change, and through the budget monitoring we therefore identify how we might mitigate those at-risk savings. We monitor those at-risk savings really prudently, and the role of finance is to challenge some of that delivery. One of the other areas that we do to mitigate is to consider when savings have been delivered, can we stretch any of those areas where we have seen success? As I said at the start, we've had a really challenging savings target of £19.5 million in this financial year, but we are making significant progress already at Q2, and the reports show that. What that means is that we can focus our capacity and energy now over the remainder of the financial year in those savings targets that are at risk to maximise delivery of savings and or mitigations for the remainder of the financial year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stark.
Yes, we know we were in Q2, there's obviously savings at a risk. I'm really trying to get at whether there's a structural issue here for Cabinet. Whether the way that the council is actually made up in terms of its directorates is one of the problems that is causing some friction between directorates and what is actually being forecast in terms of savings. Because I assume that some of the savings in this area may be dependent on some of the other directorates delivering their part of the bargain. I could be wrong in that way. But the question I want to ask Cabinet and the leader in particular, given we've got this position with this persistent Q2 pressure here in terms of savings in the corporate and central budgets, do you think there's a need to look at whether there's a structural issue here for the way the council is organised, and whether we've looked at transformation E&E, whether we need transformation in these areas as well, on a structural side, not necessarily on an IT side, leader?
Thank you, Councillor Stark, for the question. The way I would see it is this: I don't think there's a structural issue, but there is an issue with the way that the council operates and has to transform. And you catch us right in the middle of starting that process. So we've been talking about Thrive and transformation and all of the projects and all of the savings that we want to make as a response to that transformation. So I don't think it's that structurally the departments or the directorates aren't working together well. What has to happen is the whole council has to transform. And that's why when we came to writing the council plan, I was absolutely adamant that there should be a fourth leg to the table, you know, place, people growth, but transformation as well. And so we've been joined by a director of transformation, and that is really going to transform the way we deliver services across the piece. So it's not that the old models were not working well together, it's the fact that the whole council just has to be on that transformation journey, and that will lead to efficiencies and better service delivery in a way that was just not imagined in the past. That's an exciting development for the council to be in. What that is going to do is make sure that the council's more efficient. So it's not really going to be about how can we make more savings? It's how we can transform to be really efficient, to deliver those services in the way that is going to be beneficial for the running of this council and for giving services to members of the public. So I think this is I don't want to overplay it, but it's almost a golden opportunity, a golden era in transformation, because we need to be that type of council moving forward. All councils across the land need to do that, and I like to think that we're really running with this one.
Yeah, but the point is that Q2 we've got this pressure of I think it's around about 6.9 million. And I'm just trying to get grips with that. Are you satisfied that the actions that Cabinet have got in place over the next 6 months is going to address the pressures here or not? Because that's one of the concerns I've got.
If I can just share some information around the way we are approaching those at-risk savings, and you're absolutely right that there are a lot of interdependencies between those central targets and some of the directorate ones. If you revisit the budget papers that were presented to Council in February, you'll see that there are many more transformation savings targets across the other directorate schemes. And I think Cabinet were thrilled when I brought a series of complicated Venn diagrams to one of our meetings in September, where we looked at the delivery of savings through a number of different lenses, reflecting that some of the transformation saving in that central area may be at conflict with some of those other directorate, for example, staffing savings. Within each directorate savings plans, there are specific savings plans that relate to reviewing the way that the service is structured, the workforce plan, etc. And so whilst that doesn't solve the problem, knowing the problem in the first instance and be able to quantify which of those savings are in conflict, which are dependencies, enables us to take forward that action plan with more focus, because we've got that understanding of where those pressures might lie across the transformation savings for the whole council and those individual directorate ones. And Cabinet have been engaged in that process and directing corporate leadership teams and directorate teams in moving those forward. Now with the addition of Rosie, she can really take that activity forward.
But that's a risk that although I was aware of in the back of my mind, I'm sure council members in this committee were aware of it as well. It's not been transparent in any of these papers. It's not been transparent in the reporting that we're getting. And that just concerns me how we can then be a more intelligent sort of inquirer if we don't have that sort of information on how these interrelationships need to play out. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if it's a recommendation there, Chair. But it does seem to be partly what Councillor Bartlett was going on about as well. We're trying to grasp in the dark about why this is happening and what we should be expecting from Cabinet and from yourself as to the actions that should happen by Q3 and then by the end of the financial year.
Councillor Mason is keen to join in.
I am keen. I have the scars on my back from many of these sorts of programmes in other life, and there's a law called Hofstadter's law, which says that things always take longer than you expect, even when you take Hofstadter's law into account. There is a problem here with almost any transformation programme, any change programme, in that it can't be delivered typically the way most delivery projects are delivered. Just the whole framing of it. There's lots of academia on this. There's lots of sort of true case studies that when you start using your normal project management approach to transformation, it tends to hit up against things. And the reason for that, forgive me for this peroration, the reason for that is that it's not always clear what are the KPIs and the milestones that you need at the beginning of the programme, because the solutions are not always visible. And that's particularly accentuated at the moment because things are moving so fast. The point about these, the milestones that we've had being, all foundational and green and blue, it's valid, but I think there is a valid point that clearly some of the things that we would have wanted to scrutinise here have not been in those KPIs, because otherwise we would have seen some warning there about the financial impact. My point is that's the reality often of transformation programs. So I think we can be smarter about the way we do it. Rosie and I have had a number of conversations about this already to say that the way that we typically work might not be the right framework for this, to make sure that the reality of what we can get through transformation works. The risk, and this is why 80% of projects will take far longer than you expect or go over budget. The risk always is that there's an assumption there's a very simple panacea at the end, and often that's not visible. So you start saying, where are we going to find the cash? You feel an obligation to find the cash, to find the savings, but actually, as you go deeper down that journey, you find that some solutions become more obvious and some solutions become less so. So I think there is work that we will be doing on understanding that transformation journey much better.
I'm keen to respond. Do you want to add something, Leader, before we?
Yes, all I was going to say really is I think the focus on transformation deserves its own scrutiny. What we're looking at here is through the lens of a Q2 update, and I think you're asking really searching good questions about, how's transformation going, because it's the thing that we really need to do and to take this council forward. But it's difficult to look at it through the lens of a Q2. So I think, if I may suggest, transformation deserves its own meeting.
That said, we're still going to continue with this for a little bit. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. In preparation for this meeting, I took the trouble of reminding myself of the recommendations that this committee made when it was scrutinising this in-year budget in January of this year. And one of the concerns that the committee raised for those members who can actually throw their minds back to January, and indeed were on the committee at the time, was some serious concerns about the deliverability of the transformation programme in terms of the consultants that were advising us on the nature of that transformation programme, which were PwC, and the recommendations that they were making of many tens of millions of pounds worth of both savings and new income streams that the council could derive from implementing their recommendations. The degree to which those were actually achievable without continuing to walk alongside PwC, not just because they had been associated with delivering those type of programmes in other authorities, but also for exactly the reasons that Councillor Mason was outlining, in that you can't necessarily do transformation as business as usual, because it isn't, and the clue's in the name. So I guess we're finding out that all the assurances that we were provided with, that there would be a really strong, firm, no balls dropped handover between PwC's recommendations for what needed to be done and the in-house teams who were going to take those recommendations and enact them, weren't as strong as the assurances that we were provided at the time. So I think there's some learning there. Yes, we've got a director on board now who's going to take transformation forward, and that's great. But that's more than 6 months through the delivery year. And clearly, this administration had its intentions and ambitions this time last year when it was putting its budget together and working with PwC on what was feasible and what were the strongest candidates to take forward in the first tranche of the transformation work. So I would recommend to other committee members that revisiting those recommendations from the review of this budget is quite helpful, particularly in these kinds of quarterly review type meetings, but also in preparation for the scrutiny of the budget in the early in the new year. But I think also I've been surprised that as a committee we haven't yet been as curious as we might have been about the management action which is mentioned in two quite skimpy paragraphs in the Q2 budget report that are going to deliver over £8 million worth of improvements in the forecast outturn in the second half of this year, which is now actually only the third quarter of this year as we come to the completion of Q3. We've only got Q4, and only members of the administration will know how well on track we are in terms of realising on that management action. But there's no mention of what it is. We heard from Communities and Wellbeing. It was mentioned that there was £3.1 million worth of management action, the largest tranche of management action that is expected to be capable of being delivered in the second 6 months of the year. No mention of what that is. So I think a generic recommendation I would like to see is that if management action is going to be mentioned in quarterly budget delivery reports, that there is actually a bit more substance as to quite what that action is, if we are all expected to take comfort and reassurance from the black and white overspend being reduced by £8 million by that action. What is it? what is it going to be? And can the Q3 outturn report include that detail so that we can see what's been done between Q2 and Q3 and can have confidence between Q3 and Q4, as an example?
Would anyone like to respond to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. So just to respond to your first observation around the work that PwC completed for us in respect of identifying some of those high-level opportunities for us to deliver those transformation savings. We're continuing to work with those recommendations. They produced, as you rightly say, some somewhat aspirational targets. And as you would expect, in my role, my responsibility is to challenge those targets and to work through the corporate leadership team and directors to understand which of those targets and opportunities, as you rightly mentioned, are the best ones to proceed with, which ones we have the highest success of delivery, which are the quick wins. And Rosie is taking that work along now and putting together that continuing with the detailed work to bring those savings plans to fruition in this year and in future years. So we absolutely are continuing with those series of recommendations with a realistic eye as to what can be achieved. Accept the points that you've raised about the financial monitoring reports, and we will endeavour to bring some more detail in future reports. In the monitoring reports that we prepared and presented in the last financial year, we did in fact highlight the impact of that recovery activity in subsequent reports, and we quantified how that had reduced, and we were confident about that. So we will do that in the Q3 report. That recovery action is from a variety of sources through the expenditure control panels, which remain in place, which were effective in the previous financial year. Those are where on a weekly basis directorate panels meet to challenge new expenditure, regardless of whether there is a budget available, to identify whether we can reduce, defer or stop spend over the remainder of the financial year, particularly in directorates where we have those overspends. We're also considering application of some directorate reserve balances for one-off spend and a range of other mitigations that we will provide more clarity on in the Q3 report.
Councillor Harvey?
Yes, thank you for that. That'll all be welcome improvement. I'd also like to query, seeing as this is a report that's pointing at the 31st of March next year, and you know, we're actually taking events that are going to occur between Q2 and the end of the financial year into account in developing this report, why we are not similarly forecasting the additional interest that we are expecting to obtain in the Treasury management element of this report, and we're only actually recognising the additional interest that we have received as a consequence of interest rates being higher than we had planned for them to be in the way that we had structured our budget. We're only actually taking that additional income to the Q2 point in the year, when inevitably, I mean, we could make some assumptions about whether interest rates are going to go up or down from where they are now, but we're not actually surfacing what we must know will be additional income that we're going to receive over that which we had budgeted to receive in the second half of the year.
So you're right to point out that in the Q2 monitoring, we have recognised the income received and we have not forecast any additional interest earnings over the remainder of the financial year, and that's purely to be prudent. From a Treasury management perspective, we manage our cash balances, our borrowing, and we have a very detailed cash flow forecast, but we respond to the needs of our debtor and creditor programmes, and historically it has been accounting practice to recognise as it's earned, because that's the money that we are assured of in the year, and there has never been a forecast for the remainder of the financial year in respect of potential interest that could be earned, and that's to make sure that we are reporting responsibly.
I mean, we're responsibly reporting what we're expecting to be our deficits, but we're not responsibly, when we are taking it as responsible not to report the upside. And it just feels like it's kind of in our back pocket somewhere. Would it not be equally responsible to make some prudent assumptions about what the interest rate's going to be between Q2 and the end of the year, and actually recognise that expected additional income, with whatever caveats we want to put against it, as part of our rounded picture pointing at the end of the year?
I think we can certainly take that away. In terms of in changing the forecast to reflect that, I think the preference would be to report once achieved, once earned that income, but we could make reference in the budget monitoring report around some of those assumptions and our expectations based on current forecast of cash balances and need over the remainder of the financial year. So we will take that away and consider.
Thank you, because actually we could be looking at £1 million at least less in terms of end of year overspend than we're currently forecasting, which surely would be good news for everybody.
It seems like a potential recommendation for this committee. I'm hoping to draw this to a close. I don't want to cut if people have points they want to make. So Councillor Stark, anybody else? Once we've finished this bit, we'll have a break and then we'll come back and talk about recommendations. So this will be your last chance. Councillor Stark is going.
Just one observation on windfalls. Don't normally forecast windfalls, so I can understand the concern there. Certainly in central government terms, we're always careful that windfalls, say if you've got more tax than expected, is great, but to try and forecast through the year can be difficult. Now, this is a linked question to what Councillor Harvey was talking about. I was going to raise this question about the 11 million transfer from the business rates risk reserve to this broad contingency reserve. And I wondered, did that signal a concern by the Cabinet about some overspend that we are not aware of, that you're hedging your bets? Because it seems to me that I don't understand the logic why you made that 11 million transfer at this stage. So I'd like to at least have an assurance on that, because I think it does come back to what Councillor Harvey was saying.
No. All the pressures that we think we're going to have are all in the Q2 reports, and rather than wait until the end of the year and say, well, how are you going to manage this situation, whatever the situation may be, there's a strategy in place and we're upfront about that. But that's not because we're anticipating something else that we haven't thought of. There will always be certain things that you can never plan for, but no, this is just having a long-term strategy to address any demands, but with a proviso that those demands are being managed as we go through the year. Rachel, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more to that.
Just to note that we're currently completing our annual review of earmarked reserves, and that will be brought to the meeting of Cabinet in January.
And perhaps something we need to look at, Chair. Yeah.
Councillor Harvey will have the last point.
Thank you. The last two, hopefully. First of all, I wouldn't consider interest received on cash balances investments as being a windfall. If we're investing the money and it's millions and millions that we're investing at whatever the interest rates are that we're investing them, we should be making some reasonable predictions as to what we're going to be getting in income terms. Also, I just wanted to highlight a whisker twitch that I got from what Mr. Allenby was saying about the difficulties in putting business cases together for investments, and it was specifically to do with the bringing forward employment land in the market towns. Now, I recognise where we're having to get money from central government, and we're having to abide by Green Book rules to do with that. But when we're looking to borrow ourselves, and maybe not all of those strictures necessarily apply, that we are recognising in the round the total value that these investments deliver, not just in terms of, you know, capital uplift on whatever it is we end up building with bricks and mortar or corrugated metal or whatever it ends up being, but also the uplift in skills, the additional jobs, the future business rates, the future council tax that will be able to be paid by the residents who will be able to come here for high value jobs as a consequence of that, clawing back the commuters who are currently going to work out of the county because they can't get decent jobs in the county. The lack of progress that we've made over many years and multiple administrations in growing our economy to the level of the ambition that we have for that. And the general recycling of disposable income that comes as a consequence of those jobs in the local economy, helping to keep our high streets healthy and other businesses in business. And I'm just a little bit worried that if we are too narrow in how we are making our own assessments, that, you know, it'll always be kicked down the can kicked down the road into the next administration or future financial years or whatever. And it's always jam tomorrow for the market towns.
So the Green Book business case from government's got a number of different kind of core headings. So there's economy, which is looks at all of those things around economic impact and other things. There's strategic case, which how it fits with local policies and priorities. So it's a structure more than anything else in terms of looking at all the different areas of a business case. That's what the government model sets out, but that's what the headings were the same things we would look at anyways. But I guess all the things that we're bringing forward in terms of projects should fit and do fit underneath the council plan, the economic plan, that help us draw together all those different strands. I completely agree with you about all the things that we do need to transform the economy, the jobs, the skills and other things, and they're all component parts. The individual projects then look at how they fit within that overall jigsaw piece. Where we're looking for government funding, though, we need to follow their formula for how we set that out, and that's what's been brought forward in those Green Book business cases.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to draw that to a close. We are slightly later than we had hoped at this point. So I'm going to suggest we have an 8-minute break. And so we should be back at 25 to 4. We finish at 4. Can you confirm that we're... Okay, thank you very much. We are back. We have a series of recommendations which I believe have to be read into the record, and then we will vote on them.
That's correct, Chair. The recommendations of the Scrutiny Management Board on the 16th of December 2024 are as follows. That Herefordshire Council takes forward with the Marches Forward Partnership joint working on flood prevention and provides a report to SNB on progress. Undertakes a risk assessment to ensure that the changes to the Section 106 team have taken into account the lack of technical expertise within the Council and the positive impact the developments that the project team have delivered for our communities. Ensures that the Economy and Environment Directorate is adequately resourced within the current financial year, given that external contracts are due to end by March 2025 to ensure a seamless transition. Forecasts interest receipts from Treasury Management alongside other savings and income forecasts, and includes detail of management action intended to be taken to close the overspend gap by the end of the financial year in future budget monitoring reports.
Okay, I will propose those if everybody agrees. I'll see a show of hands. That seems to be unanimous. Thank you. Right, we are hurtling towards the end of the meeting. We have a small number of other items. Item 8 is the Delivery Plan Working Group terms of reference. I haven't had any conversations with anyone who had any comments on it. Are we happy with the Delivering Plan Working Group terms of reference? Then I'll see a show of hands if everyone's in favour. Thank you. That seemed to be unanimous as well. Item 9 has been a very... we've learnt a lot from this experiment, I feel. So we agreed to experiment rather than just writing recommendations at the end of a meeting to write a more detailed response to the executive. Not everybody was in favour of that, but everybody agreed that we would try it as an experiment. It turned out to be administratively quite complicated to do, and then further administrative delays mean that it was only published a couple of hours before this meeting started. So I would, on that basis, be happy to not to take a decision on it today, but also I've had representations from members that we should get it over with and perhaps not return to that in the future. Are members content? So obviously Councillor Harvey and Councillor Davis in particular have no chance to see this. So
are we on 9 or 8? Sorry,
my fault. We're on.
I've had a reboot go on my computer.
We're on 9.
Okay. Could I just ask whether we have our timings right for 8? Because if we're only presenting our if we're only going to be meeting in time to present our recommendations to Cabinet on the delivery plan on the committee, that Cabinet is going to be approving the delivery plan according to the forward plan, there isn't really any time for the recommendations of the committee to be taken into account.
As far as I'm aware, these are going to Cabinet on the 27th of March. And the working group is on the 10th of February, off the top of my head, 17th of February. So that gives several weeks for any recommendations you make to be incorporated into the Cabinet report.
Councillor Driscoll.
I think the scope, present findings and recommendations to Scrutiny Management Board 11th of March 2025, present recommendations to Cabinet 27th of March 2025.
I think since this was published, there's been a change in dates there, so the Cabinet meeting is now on the 27th of March.
That's what I said.
Oh, pardon me.
That's right.
So any recommendations that you make, but obviously the officers who are participating in the working group are the same officers who are writing the reports to Cabinet, so it's not as if there will be any surprises for them. They'll have to wait until the 11th of March to be revealed to them, so they should know those after your working group meeting, because they are part of your working group meeting. So you'd hope that the officers would incorporate those immediately rather than waiting for the 11th of March.
That makes sense to me, unless Councillor Harvey.
Well, although Scrutiny Management Board last year gave its permission and indeed encouragement for the timetable to be more realistic for the development of the first delivery plan, seeing as it was needing to be a fast follow-on from the council plan being approved for 4 years. But we did end up having a bit of a compressed time frame right at the end that meant that the recommendations of scrutiny did not get to the plan, or did not get responded to in the time frame in which the plan was approved. Now, if everybody's capable of doing things in parallel, despite the sequencing from a governance pipeline point of view, then fine. I'm just flagging it now because we ended up, having a concertinaed timeline and a bit of a crunch.
It is a thing certainly to pay attention to, but I think we will go with the committee has agreed to that. I think we will stick to that. Item 9. So I'm entirely at the committee's disposal. Councillor Davis and Councillor Harvey cannot have reasonably had time to look at this item, and so that would suggest that we should push it back. But other members would like, who were part of that discussion, would like to agree it now. Councillor Driscoll.
Can I suggest we extend this meeting by 15 minutes?
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Fagan. All those in favour? Any against?
No.
Okay. Councillor Stark.
Notwithstanding that Councillor Davis and Councillor Harvey haven't seen this for very long, this response, the longer we delay it, the less chance there is, as Councillor Harvey was just saying about a delivery plan, of us having any impact on the shape of the capital programme for next year. So we're in the same bind with this one, as Councillor Harvey was saying with the task and finish group on the delivery plan. So I would suggest, unless there's rule objections, that we sign this off today, Chair.
Okay, that is my proposal. Can I have a show of hands in favour of signing this off?
I said I wouldn't stand in the way of the process, but for the record, as we're voting, I'm going to abstain because, it clearly didn't work. But I would like to say I am encouraged by the amount of work that the committee has done today to try and form recommendations on the go to keep the momentum of SMB going.
Okay, so sorry, can we just, all those in favour, let's have a show of hands. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Any against? And I make it 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Yep.
Okay, cheers.
Item 10, to consider the work programme. We have clearly in the course of this debate suggested a number of things that need to be added to the work programme and modified. So if you're happy, I suggest that we bring a revised work programme to the next meeting. Sure. But yes.
You should also have an invitation in your inboxes to a work programme meeting for the committee sometime in January. So If you'd like to reply to that, I'd be very grateful.
But if, sorry, Councillor Fagan?
Yeah, Chair, and also that the work programme item for Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee has moved. So we've done a swap. I don't know if we need to note that now because it's the January meeting.
I update and publish this on a monthly basis, so it's almost immediately out of date as soon as I have done. So I've incorporated those into the January work programme, the iteration that will be published in January.
Okay, the recommendation is that we agree with the draft work programme, and also a second recommendation, we note the programme for other scrutiny committees and identify opportunities for alignment or future work, which I believe we have already done. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Finally, item 11, the date of the next meeting is Tuesday the 14th of January. We have some briefing arranged with the Director of Resources in advance of that. Can I thank you all for attending? Can I ask that, unless they have any formal... We haven't got any attendees, I didn't say that. Finally, before I formally close this meeting, can I check with the Democratic Services team the live stream has been switched off and we are no longer broadcasting live or recording? That's correct. Yeah. Okay, thank you everybody.